Okay, good morning. It's a pleasure to see you here in Florence. It's a double pleasure, as you know, because it was a while that we couldn't meet in person, and in the last couple of years, we have this occasion to restart. And then the occasion is the conclusion of the work on the Media Pluralism Monitor 2022 that will be published today. So we will present the result this morning. And as you know, in the afternoon, we'll have a discussion on some of the issues that are important for the evolution of the media in Europe through the imminent presentation of the European Media Freedom Act. And then as a final part of the day, there will be a discussion with the MPM teams and the central team and the local teams about how to improve the MPM, evolve the MPM in the next phase. So let's get started on the presentation. I will do a very short introduction, then the researchers that have written the report will present the different areas of the report. Used to work. No. That's to work, this one. Wait a second. Okay, let me very briefly summarize what we are presenting today, the Media Pluralism Monitor 2022. Let me, however, summarize the fact that the CMPF in this past months and in the past year, let's say, has been also concentrated on two different programs on which some of you has participated also. The study on media plurality and diversity online, that is a study that the Commission has asked us to develop. Was a tender for the Commission to, it's a study parallel to the impact assessment for the new law, but was a study concentrating on the situation of media plurality online, but then also offline, because the idea was to have a general overview. It's a very major study that should contribute, we hope, to the decision of the Commission respect to the new law and to the new proposal of regulation of the media. And anyway, is also an interesting contribution for understanding what is happening in Europe about media plurality. So I would consider this study, while it's different in the characterization and in the definition, as a parallel instrument to understand respect to the Media Pluralism Monitor. So I suggest to examine the study when it will be really public, because I don't think it has been still officially published, but is finished. So we have concluded the work and will be published, I think, with the impact assessment and all the other documents when the European Media Freedom Act will come out, so in the next weeks. The other thing, just to mention the activity, we have been partnering in the research with the European Digital Media Observatory, EDMO. We had a specific role in this research that was trying to help design indicators for the disinformation. EDMO is an effort essentially about contrasting disinformation in Europe. in the member states, and we have been asked essentially to contribute in the policy part and also the identification of possible indicators. This is a work in progress, so we'll see in the future how it will develop. Clearly, also this has a certain connection with the NPM activity, but it's clearly a different work and a different effort. Okay, instead, this doesn't work again. Okay. Okay, so very quickly, the NPM method, I think that we are in an environment in which the expert of the NPM methods are here. So I won't spend much time, but as you know, we have a comprehensive questionnaire that is the basis of the NPM. As I said, sometimes it's essentially a questionnaire, but it's a complicated one somehow. And as you know, based on 4 areas, 20 indicators and 200 variables, both of qualitative and quantitative dimensions. The team that is developing this is the central team in Florence, and a very important national expert team that at this point involves around 100 researchers in the network that has contributed to the development of this project in this year. The sources, as you know, are essentially secondary sources because we use secondary data. We don't produce data primarily in this work. However, we use also certain general sources, secondary sources from the countries, but also some general sources like Eurostat, GMMP, and so on. We have that certain database that we use especially for the quantitative measures. This use of existing sources is integrated by some interviews and of experts when there are specific areas of.
No, okay, bet man, nu, lai viņi tādā tad dzīvo, nu, viņiem to.
And could you please mute yourself? Sorry, mute the microphone. Yes.
Okay. So I say for certain special teams that have a particular expertise, for instance, media literacy, or also how minorities are dealt in member states and things like this, we sometimes need in the member state, in the local teams need to create new information and new data, interviewing people and doing specific research. All the activity is uses methods of control. The general method of control of the activity of the effort is done by the fact that local teams create the response to the questionnaire, organize the response to the NPM, and the central team controls it in a dialogue with the local teams. But there are also other kind of controls. For instance, there is a group of expert method in which certain more controversial questions are asked to be validated by a group of experts with an effort in the countries. So there is an effort to validation of the most controversial issues. And for not all the countries every year, but for a significant group of countries, is also asked to an expert from the same country, an independent expert from the team that has created the report for the country, and also independent from the CMPF, to have a peer review, a full peer review of the report with giving an opinion, and in case of disagreements, helping to clarify points. So you see, the local teams are done by experts and they do the research. The central team in Florence check and discuss this research, not only in the sense of checking it, but also in the sense of working for coordination and common interpretation of the variables and the elements of the research. And then there are these further controls. As you know, we have this online platform for all data collection that is very important. And finally, the results comes out from an algorithm that try to balance the variables in a very clear way that is in the general report in the methodology chapter is full in place. So in theory is replicable by anybody who wants to replicate our numbers. The result of this year, very, very quickly, because they will be discussed in detail. The fundamental protection, as you know, assesses essentially how is the situation, the basic general situation of the system, of a media system in a country. So freedom of expression, access to information, the situation of journalists, how do they can work, the independence and effectiveness of the media authority. These are all the basic ingredients of having a media system that works. And these are essentially checked by the fundamental protection, obviously starting from the constitutional legal protection, but looking at all these elements of functioning of a media system. The result, and this shouldn't surprise, are this year at 35% risk, is a medium risk, close to the green area, so close to the low risk, and that's the minimum one should expect from European countries, because there should be a consolidation of fundamental protection in the countries, but still there are issues. Only one country is at high risk, but there are 12 that are in medium risk and 19 that are in the green area. So this is a reasonable result, but clearly we will see that there are areas where things could be improved also here. Then we have market plurality. Market plurality very clearly is the economic of the media markets. It focuses on the economic aspect with a lot of weight given to transparency, because you cannot understand the media market, the concentration of a media market, if you don't have knowledge, transparent knowledge of who is the final owner of the media. Then there is this analysis of concentration, both in the dimension of concentration of the producers of content and concentration of the distributors of content, the new platforms and distributor of contents. Then there are other issues like competition issues that are taken into account, and there is a care for evaluating the commercial influence in the newsroom, so how really work the situation from this point of view, from the point of view also of the guarantees that have the producer of content. And very important, particularly this year, there is an analysis of the viability of the media enterprises, because after COVID, there has been a very deep crisis. And so also this year, we analyze what happened with the recovery. The general result is 66%, so it's very close to the red area. 16 countries are in the high-risk area. This is a signal of a strong concentration in this market and of the disease of the media market that we know that is very important. We'll talk about this a little bit more in detail in the afternoon. Will be one of the themes of the discussion of the afternoon. 15 countries are in the medium risk, only one country is in low risk. So that's definitely the most difficult area of the monitor. Then we have political independence. That is very important because it has to do with the role of the media of guaranteeing, helping to guarantee democracy in the countries. And we have the year analysis of politicization of the media organization, of the newsroom, their independence, the role of public service media, and special attention to the role of media offline and online during elections, because this is really the issue of the relation between media and democracy. So these are the main themes of the political independence area. The result is 49%, real in the middle. We have 8 high-risk countries, and that's this will be discussed in a minute in detail. This serious risk, the fact that there are 8 European countries in our analysis that are in high risk for political independence. That means that there is a situation that doesn't guarantee many countries a reasonable political independence of the media. 15 countries in medium risk and only 9 in low risk. That's a worrisome indicator. Then we have the final indicator, social inclusiveness, that, as you know, assesses the risk for certain categories to be included in the society. And we have here minorities, local and regional communities, the analysis of the condition of women and people with disability. And also we have a special focus in the past few years in this area of social inclusiveness on the issue of media literacy from one side, that it's the instruments to understand and interpret correctly the media, and on the other side, the issues of hate speech and disinformation. The results, unfortunately, are not that good even on this, because we are at 54% risk, with, however, 5 countries in high risk, less than in political, 22 in medium risk, and only another 5 in low risk. So this is a situation also that, but will be discussed in detail in a while. So the highlights, and I conclude on this. First, the highlights are a choice of the things that struck us most looking at the situation. One is that the diffusion of SLAPs, that's a serious issue. We need, and we hope that something will be done in the European, with the new law. We need to do something, Europe needs to do something about this growing and effective use of SLAPs to silent journalism. That's very risky, very against the role of the journalism as a watchdog of democracy. The second element that strikes us again is the digital safety of journalists, high risk, 6 percentage point, 65% risk. Journalists are target to a speech, threatened implicitly or explicitly. And this is not only digital, but digital is clearly the new phenomenon here. And as it's quoted here, also the Pegasus spyware that was put in journalist computers and so on. So this is another serious area in which states should intervene. The third is that while the media market has recovered in 21 a little bit, generally speaking, this recovery has not benefited everybody, especially has not benefited journalists first, has not benefited the print media, has not benefited local media. So there has been a general recovery of the media market in 2021 after the COVID disaster, but this recovery is selective and probably is missing some of the parts that are more important for the role of journalism, of pluralism that we are studying with major interest. Then editorial autonomy is very high score risk still, and this is serious because in an area in which journalists are financially vulnerable and media are economically vulnerable, this editorial lack of editorial autonomy obviously compound the risks. And so it's another element that worries us. Then protection against hate speech, this is on the rise, is a serious issue. The issue here is very clear. There is a regulatory system that was created for the offline world that can protect in the offline world. It's difficult to adapt and translate this to the online world. And so we are struggling with this. Let's see also if the the new law will help. But anyway, this is a long-term and difficult effort to do, because if not, the situation gets worse. And finally, there is the issue of disinformation. Clearly that there are 15 countries in high risk on these indicators, and only 2 countries in the low risk evaluation. So again, also disinformation is a serious issue, and we'll see how this will develop in the next years. We know that it's a major challenge. Okay, I think that these are the highlights. This is the analysis, but clearly we need to go deeper, and we'll do it asking all the researchers to go deep.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see that many of you could join in person our conference this year. I'm new in the team, and I will be presenting the fundamental protection area. Well, our idea this year is to have a very dynamic conference. So we prepared a very brief presentation highlighting the main findings of this year. And then we would like to interact with the country teams. So you also have your word in this conference. And we have agreed with some of the country teams. In my case, with our Spanish country team, Jaume, after my presentation, he will be talking a bit about the situation of the safety of journalists in Spain. And of course, I will mention some examples during my presentation, and you can talk afterwards about the situation in your own countries. So Professor Pier Luigi already presented in terms of the theoretical part of the project, the areas. So I will be basically presenting the findings. Well, I need some technical assistance. Okay. So as you probably know, you need to share it. Sorry, as you probably know, the fundamental protection area consists of 5 indicators. So protection of freedom of expression, the right to information, journalistic profession, independence of the media authority, and universal reach of traditional media and access to the internet. Well, we'll see that some of these indicators are less problematic than others. Professor Pier Luigi already anticipated the risk average for the fundamental protection area, which is in the medium risk band, but we still have some problems and things that should be improved in this area. As he mentioned before, we have only one country, Turkey, in the high risk area band. And basically, the novelty this year is that Italy joined the low risk band. It was in 2021, it was in the medium risk, and it joined the low risk band. Maybe then Roberta could also talk a bit about this. And so the risk average showed no difference in comparison to 2021. Well, here we can see the risk averages per indicator. We can see that the less problematic indicators are less problematic in comparison to the others, not in general. The protection of freedom of expression, independence of the media authority, and the universal reach of traditional media and access to the internet are the 3 indicators that more or less they remained stable. Protection of freedom of expression actually remained at the same risk average as last year, and the other 2 with the arrows had 1 point percentage difference higher or lower. And really the two indicators that had presented a kind of slight difference in comparison to 2021 are the protection of the right to information and journalistic profession. But the difference between them is that the right to information had a decrease in the risk, whereas the journalistic profession had an increase. So freedom of expression, we have the average of 34%, the same as last year. The difference here is that we have 4 countries that joined the, we have 4 countries, sorry, we have 1 country that joined the high risk band, and it's Poland. So last year we had only Turkey in the high risk band. This year we have Poland and Turkey. And maybe then Beata can have a word and talk about the situation in Poland and the reasons that led to this shift in the risk band. Then we have the protection of the right to information, where we had actually a decrease. We have the same 2 countries in the high risk band, which are Spain and Turkey. Jaume then can also talk a bit about the situation of access to information in Spain. But here we have 4 countries that joined the low risk band, and they are Denmark, Luxembourg, Portugal, and Sweden. And this is somehow due to the transposition of the whistleblower directive, which had been transposed already in some of the EU member states. Well, now we arrive to the most problematic indicator. So I decided to show here the increased trend for this indicator. So in the last 3 years, we can clearly see that we had this increase in the risk. And this year we have 3 countries that joined the high risk. We have Croatia, Montenegro, and Greece. We'll see that we had a murder of a journalist in Greece in 2021. So it's the most problematic within the fundamental protection area. Here we have the averages just to have a view of the sub-indicators in this area. We can see that working conditions, digital safety, and positive obligations are the problematic sub-indicators in this area. Also physical safety. But working conditions, we know that these are due to the really problematic revenues of the media outlets, of the media market, but also salaries, and they don't, many countries, journalists don't have pension schemes. So the pandemic also contributed to a deterioration of their working conditions. So working conditions is one of the sub-indicators that contribute to this risk in the area. Digital safety, as Professor Parcu highlighted, it's a problem, threats to journalists, digital and also physical, because as I mentioned, there was the murder of 3 journalists actually in the countries analyzed, in Turkey, in Greece, and in the Netherlands. And we have the problem here in positive obligations. One of the problems, it's the absence, as Professor Parcu, of anti-SLAPP frameworks in several countries. There are no anti-SLAPP frameworks. Well, these are the 2 indicators that are in the low risk band. So we still have problems with the independence and effectiveness of the media authorities, but we have only 1 country in the high risk, and it it's more or less the same. There is 1 percentage point difference in relation to 2021, and the universal reach of traditional media is more or less the same. The same countries are in the same risk average as last year. Well, so in relation to the protection of freedom of expression, we still see these problems in several countries. So the criminalization of defamation, the use of slaps, and the problem of content moderation that is not transparent in several of the countries analyzed. In relation to journalistic profession, we have the problem of work conditions and the safety of journalists on and offline, because we had the problem of still have murder of journalists in Europe. So, and in relation to the independence of the media authority, though it has a low risk average, we have still problems with the appointment procedures that sometimes are not clear. And even when they are clear, we do not have accountability schemes to scrutinize the members of the media authority. So these are the main problems that we see in relation to fundamental protection. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Jean. Maybe he can comment on the situation. If you want to join he'll talk about the situation in Spain, about the safety of journalists, the problem of polarization in politics, and etc. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. Can you hear me well? Is it working? Perfect. Well, they asked me to summarize a little bit in just 2-3 minutes the problems of Spain, so I will try to be brief here. 3 main issues: editorial independence, attacks on journalists, and access to information, which I guess is also problems shared in other of the countries in this study. Relating to the first one, editorial independence, we have seen an increase of unemployment and job insecurity related, of course, with COVID, but this also was a problem before COVID in Spain, and a very important one. And secondly, a lack of political and economical independence, which affects the job of journalists in Spain. This is something we have been finding in the last years of the MPM, and just to put some data, in a recent survey, just 22% of the journalists in Spain said, or they affirm, that they didn't receive any political or economical pressures during their job. So you can imagine that the figures here are pretty high. In relation with attacks on journalists, although perhaps now Spain is not appearing in the news as much as some years ago, but we have a country very polarized because of the rise of far right, the recent Catalan push for independence, and the reaction of the state, the state response, also because of COVID. And also because for example, in 2021, very big demonstrations against the jailing of a singer, or in Barcelona, in Madrid, and in other cities. All these kind of events has kind of normalized attacks and harassment on journalists. It's kind of normal that journalists now see when they are reporting in the middle of demonstrations, see that they have been pushed and so on, not just by demonstrators, but also by members of law enforcement. I will put as an example of a photojournalist, Jordi Borràs, who was in the city center of Barcelona at daylight. He was attacked by a police that then identified himself. And this has been happening like 3 years ago. And just a couple of weeks ago, the kind of trial concluded, and was very shocking to see that this policeman was actually keep doing his work, and is not going to be banned for that when he attacked the kind of journalist when even he was not working for purely ideological reasons. It needs to be highlighted that Jordi Borràs is a well-known photojournalist specialized in covering far right. So this is a huge problem. And in relation with access to information, just to be also brief, the main problem in Spain is that the body in charge of overseeing the right to information does not have sanctioning capacity, which means that it's difficult for news media, institutions, and journalists to actually ask information from public bodies. And Spain also did not transport European regulations on whistleblowers, which makes the country also having huge problems and being in high risk in this area. That's.
Thank you very much, Jean. Well, I think I will pass the floor now to Roberto because we have to stretch. We have a very limited time. And then we will have time for questions, okay, at the end.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, everyone. To introduce the market plurality area, first of all, I want really to thank you, all the country teams that for all the work, but particularly the data collection for market has been particularly challenging because we are trying to collect secondary data in core during the year when the year is not finished. So it has been really hard. Particularly when the economy is so goes up and down, like in the last 2 years. So I want really to thank you for the effort that you did last year. And in the afternoon, we will discuss how to improve this data collection. Pier Luigi already explained which are the indicators in the market plurality area. So I will skip quickly on this. Just I want to emphasize the fact that these are all impacted by the digital revision in some way of the questionnaire that we did. So we have the evaluation of the digital risk in each of them, but in particular, we have an indicator that is on digital platforms, and this open the since 2020. Yes, since 2020, we in some way this opened the monitor to the evaluation of the risk brought by considering actors that are not in a strict sense media, that don't produce media content, but they operate in the media market like the digital platforms. And okay, which apparently we have good news because the market plurality area was at high risk last year and is a medium risk this year. But as you can see, it's 66%, so it is very close to the border of the high risk, and the reduction has been due to the economic recovery that in some way impacted the indicator on the economic sustainability of media. Does it mean that we are in a safe area in market plurality area? Not at all, because it is still the area with the highest risk score across the Media Pluralism Monitor. And we have 16 countries at high risk, 15 countries in a medium risk, and just one country, Germany, at low risk. And traditionally, okay, I keep explaining because we are running. Traditionally in this area, the risks come from the indicators on concentration. I don't know what to do. Ok, posso tornare indietro? Questo è avanti. Okay, okay. So you can see the dimension of the market plurality, the economic risks are traditionally in the European media market are related to the concentration. In the two indicators that evaluate the concentration in the market are the one of news media concentration and online platform concentration. And news media concentration went up, if possible, because it is already at, it has already always been at a very high level, and the online platform concentration and competition enforcement more or less stayed at the same level. We registered a slight decrease of the risk in the indicator on transparency of media ownership, and a decrease of risk in media viability, and interestingly, an increase of risk in indicator on the economic independence of journalism, in some way on the commercial and owner pressure, owner influence over editorial content. I will focus in this presentation on the issues of concentration and media viability, but let's just to explain why it is possible, and for what we read across all the country reports and the data collection from the countries, that the transparency indicator registered an improvement because of the process of transposition and implementation of the European Union anti-money laundering fifth directive. But we don't ask just for the transparency, disclosure of information to the public authorities, but also the access of the public to information. And this is still problematic in most countries. And the sub-indicator on the digital, on transparency in the digital environment is at high risk, because it is not, it depends from the fact that often the regulatory framework is built for the legacy media, so it does not include the digital, and for the phenomenon of the cross-border media that is higher in the digital realm. And the commercial and owner influence, I already told that the threats to the economic independence of journalists, as also Danielle highlighted, is strictly related to the deteriorating working condition and to the poor media viability. You need money, you are more exposed to, you are more vulnerable to economic pressures. So for the indicators of market power, the news media concentration shows at 82% risk. This is due to, as you can see, I don't know if you see maybe you don't read what is written below the histograms. The lower histograms are the ones, the sub-indicator about the regulatory framework. There are rules, media-specific rules on concentration. We know also from the Media Pluralism Online study that they are fragmented across the European Union. But what is clear from the Media Pluralism Monitor results is that they don't success in addressing the issue of concentration, because the other sub-indicators are the numeric one, the ones that assess the situation on the ground. It is the concentration index in market shares and audience share. That is high. traditionally in audiovisual, also in radio and in newspaper, a bit lower in the digital, and high also for cross-media concentration. What we see, what we saw in this research this year is that many countries report a tendency toward concentration as a mean to improve economic sustainability and to face the competition of the digital actors in the online advertising market and in general in the media market. And the other indicator of market power is strictly related because it's the one on the online platforms, and also this indicator also is at high risk. Here I wanted to highlight that we measure this concentration by the side of the access to the news, how do people access news, and the concentration of the online advertising market. We have a specific question of the top 4 actors in the online advertising market, and all the countries that had an answer to this question, that had data, signal and high risk. That means that 28. The other countries are not present because they have no data. That means that the first 4 operators control more than 50% of the online advertising market. But this is an optimistic way to put this, because we know from the reports that you can read as soon as they are published in a few hours, that 2 or 3 players that are Google, Facebook, and Amazon control around 78% in the online advertising market. The indicator of media viability is strictly related, is related to the improvement in media viability, is related to the rebound of the economy that we had in 2021. The 56% result is better than the high risk result that we had last year. Still, 26 countries are at high risk for this indicator. So the improvement is not generalized. There is a difference across the countries, and there are differences across these media sectors. Newspaper and local media are still at high risk. And I want to stress that when we measure newspaper, we are not just assessing the situation of the print newspaper, but of the newspaper industry, also in their attempts to evolve and to go digital. And we have, another issue in this field is that the sub-indicator on employment and salary condition of journalists did not improve as well, but not at the same rate of the economic recovery. So the economic recovery did not benefit so far the journalistic employment, and with the enduring this very difficult condition for the freelancers journalists. We can go in depth in this. I have no time, but I think that this is an issue that I want also to highlight in the conclusion. The key findings for concentration. We see that there is a further push toward concentration that poses in some way a dilemma. That is when concentration is related to the need of survive. How do the competition and the media authority face this situation? And it is an open question that I think that we can discuss. And one proposal that we have written in the report, but also in the our position paper for the Media Freedom Act, is that when merger consolidation in the media sector is at stake, a media pluralism test can be added in the evaluation of the merger. And there are also regulatory developments. One of these is important not because we are in Florence, but because and this is the new Italian framework on the concentration in the media sector that can be relevant for all the countries in the European Union, because it is related to it is also due to the need to comply to a sentence of the Court of Justice, so to comply with the European principles of the European law. Another key finding is that there are developments to be followed in the relationship between publishers and platforms that are registered in our indicator on online platform, and the way to address the unbalanced market power between the media actors and the platforms. And also in this case, we can connect the evolution with what will happen in the regulatory framework in the European Union with the Digital Market Act. Finally, we all, across all the area, are speaking about the economic condition of journalists, and we emphasize the need to introduce the concept of the economic safety tools to protect journalists from an economic point of view, and not only from the, of course, important point of view of the physical and digital safety. Thank you, and I will give the floor to Matteo Trevisan, that is a researcher of our center, and maybe he can briefly explain the Italian situation.
So I would like to thank Roberta for her presentation. Good morning, everyone. I am Matteo Trevisan. I'm a research associate with the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom. And I have collaborated with Roberta to this year's assessment of the Italian situation, as well as in other research exercises with the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom. So first of all, I would like to recall what Roberta just introduced with regards to the anti-concentrations limitations in Italy, and to specifically provide some insights on the reform of the anti-concentration provisions in the country that was carried out in the context of the transposition of the EU Audiovisual Media Services Directive in December 2021, and that replaced the 2004 consolidated text on audiovisual and radio media services with a new consolidated act that is the so-called TUSMA. So, by way of introduction, this year's assessment of the Italian situation demonstrated once again the high degree of concentration of the Italian media market, and that this trend has been accentuated by the worsening economic conditions in the sector. In brief, this situation reflects the fact that the design of the previously available media-specific anti-concentration provisions aimed at safeguarding media pluralism in the so-called integrated communication system did not allow the effective tackling of the market dominance. And that's basically because of the broadness of the integrated communication system, as well as the delays in the valuation of some of its submarkets. So the reform of the anti-concentration framework in Italy came with an important 2020 decision from the Court of Justice of the European Union, following the Mediaset Vivendi dispute, this decision declared contrary to the EU law, and specifically contrary to Article 49 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, the provision of the Italian law that prevented the French company Vivendi from acquiring the 28% of the capital in Mediaset Italia. Indeed, according to the court, even though a restriction of freedom of establishment may be justified by an objective in the general interest, such as the protection of pluralism of information and the media, this was not the case with regard to the provision in question in Italy, since the Italian provision set thresholds which bore no relation to the risk to media pluralism, as those thresholds did not make it possible to determine whether and to what extent an undertaking is actually in a position to influence the content of the media. So, based on this decision, the Italian consolidated text has been subsequently reformed in 2021, and according to the new Article 51 of the text, the TUSMA indeed, in order to evaluate when a dominant position has been established, thresholds are now to be considered as symptomatic indicators of significant market power that must be evaluated case by case by the Italian media regulator following guidelines that are set every 3 years by the same Italian regulator, media regulator, that is the Agicom. It's important to notice in this context that the reform received some critical remarks both from the side of the competition authority and the academia. From the side of the competition authority was noted that a dysfunctional overlapping of competencies may emerge, and this may happen particularly when analytical tools that are used in the competition enforcement are to be used with the aim of reaching a different goal, in this case, media pluralism, without involving the competition authority at any stage in the process. While from the side of the academia has been underlined that the new TUSMA exceeds the scope that was defined by the Court of Justice, and on the fact that the criteria that are set to evaluate the dominance are still anchored to the market revenues rather than on audience shares. So in conclusion, for the scope of the present discussion, it's important to underline, based on the developments in the Italian regulatory field, how the Court of Justice decision set the principle that national laws can limit freedom of establishment to preserve media pluralism, but it has to be proved at the same time that the limits set by national laws effectively protect and guarantee pluralism. This appears to be an important landmark as the Court of Justice posed a principle that is valid for all member states in a context where the results of the Media Pluralism Monitor evidenced a fragmentation of the approaches in the European Union and the need to update the rules that were issued for the legacy media to the digital environment of the media has become evident. And thus we could say that the principle poses itself as a new reference point for the relationship between national law and the internal market, and even more so in a time of important legislative modifications such as the announced Media Freedom Act. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm giving back the floor to Roberta.
Thank you, Matteo. Maybe you can turn it off. And I don't know if we want to also to see if anyone wants to step in this for this area, or if we want to keep this discussion for the final part of the morning.
Yes, maybe we can do a first round of questions here. I don't know. I've heard that there are some questions from the floor.
No, there was just one question in the chat, but that was, I think, solved. They were asking what we mean exactly by content moderation. I mean, by which actors? And I specified that we mean by digital intermediaries, and Danielle was speaking about the transparency of the criteria used for filtering and removing content.
Yes, of course. And anyone from Francesca?
For what concerns the link you made, and it's really interesting to me, between the economic conditions of journalists and their safety and their independence, I'm wondering if there is, are there any criteria that let you see that there is a common trend in Europe? I'm not sure that you know, precarious conditions of work in Italy are the same than in Poland, Hungary, or in Spain. So is there a common European trend when we talk about economic and safety of journalists? And do you think we would need a kind of European way to improve these economic conditions? Are there any laws and initiatives from the EU side about that?
Yes, thank you, Francesca. I think that we can go reading the reports, and maybe the other researchers can also explain that it is a common trend that is related mainly to the growth of a kind of a freelancer condition that is not freelancer anymore. It is not chosen. No, it is a way to save money by the news and the reduced budgets of the newsrooms. And of course, it is not the same across all over the countries. There are a huge difference. In this indicator, we ask if there are self-regulatory tools to protect the journalist in case in which the editorial line of the media changes, in case in which the ownership changes. And another development that is common is the lack of regulation in the digital, also in the legacy media in some cases, but in the digital more to have a clear disclosure of what is advertising and what is original content. As for the proposals, they can involve the self-regulation by the journalists. It is better to have tools that are born in the newsrooms than have a state-controlled protection. But any tool to improve media viability is an improvement, of course, of the economic independence of journalists.
May I add something, Francesca? I think that also there is the problem of many countries do not provide for labor legislation, so they do not have, for example, collective agreements, journalists. So also from this point of view, they are vulnerable from the point of view of the labor legislation.
Also positive news, there are also best practices like cases in which state support, extraordinary schemes of state support have been linked to journalistic projects to support directly the creators, the providers of the news in the local news. There are examples of positive actions to improve the situation.
And of course, if I'm not mistaken, the recommendation of the European Commission on safety of journalists takes into account also this economic part, I mean, of the problem. So I recommend to read it too for a European overview. And as regards the trends, yes, I mean, there are a few countries that are green with this sub-indicator, indeed. And they are mostly countries in Northern Europe, where we found also a willingness to pay for news that is not present in other areas.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me properly? Yeah, okay. I'm filling in for Nenadić this morning, who couldn't make it, unfortunately, today. So I might be reading most of the text. I hope that's not a problem. Yeah. So the area of political independence is made up of 5 indicators. The first one, political independence of the media, looks at the extent of political control over traditional and digital media. The indicator on editorial autonomy looks at the effectiveness of journalistic self-regulation and the rules that guarantee political independence of the media. Audiovisual media, online platforms, and elections looks at the conditions that make a level playing field possible when it comes to political advertising. State regulation of resources and support to the media sector looks mainly at public support, subsidies to the media, and independence of public service media governance is straightforward. So this area shows a medium risk at 49%, which is more or less the same as in last year's. Over the past few years, we saw a slow but steady increase. So the situation is getting worse from year to year, even if not very visibly, but still there's more of a downward trend, or if we talk about risk, an upward trend. The situation is getting worse. And there are 8 countries that score high risk in this area. 3 of them are candidates: Albania, Serbia, and Turkey. And there are 4 EU member countries: Hungary, Malta, Poland, Slovenia, and Bulgaria. When looking at the specific indicators within the area of political independence, we can first see that for each indicator, the risk score is higher if the 5 candidate countries are also included in the calculation. While conditions differ from state to state, on average, and as in previous rounds of the MPM, the performance of the indicators of editorial autonomy, political independence of the media, the independence of public service media governance and funding, these are the 3 areas that stand out since they have an increased risk rate in the upper medium risk band. Editorial autonomy should be one of the key guarantors of journalistic freedom and of protection from unwanted outside interference in the editorial newsmaking process. However, in the vast majority of MPM countries, there are no efficient mechanisms to protect editorial autonomy. When it comes to okay. I think someone has to mute him or herself on the other side. So when it comes to the political independence of the media, or when looking deeper at the political control over different sectors in news media, the data collection shows that the political control exercised through direct or indirect ownership is most frequently present when it comes to newspapers. But you can also see a risk in audiovisual and radio. The native digital media environment looks a bit better, but even there are countries where we can see increased control over the media, and it's mainly visible in Albania, Cyprus, Hungary. Oh, sorry, slides. Yeah. Yeah, so here you can see it, that the problem is most visible in newspapers, where it's 56%, but audiovisual is not that much better. And radio is a bit better, but even there we saw an increase in the past year. And even digital natives are not as safe as they were seen a few years ago. And for digital natives, the most problems you can see in Albania, Cyprus, Hungary, Montenegro, Romania, Serbia, Slovenia, the Republic of North Macedonia, and in Turkey. When it comes to the public service media, it is among the indicators that have an increased risk rate, and there is a relatively clear division on the map where countries in red, which are 16, so half of the countries, they are high risk, and we can see that it's mainly a problem in Eastern and Southern Europe. And there are different models of public service media management in Europe, but these high risk scores mainly reflect the inability of the existing procedures for public service media management appointments to prevent political influence in the process. Next slide is on state advertising. You can see that this is one of the most problematic, riskiest indicators in this area. The indicator looks at three sub-indicators: spectrum allocation, government subsidies, and state advertising. In a situation in which media organizations face economic difficulties that are caused by the recent economic crisis and COVID-19 and an ongoing technological disruption, the financial support from the state can be crucial, especially for less commercial forms of journalism. It is therefore of particular importance that fair and transparent rules in the distribution of state resources and support are in place, as well as that they are being effectively implemented. The lack of clear and transparent rules and the lack of available data on allocation is seen as a potential risk in this area, since the lack of transparency can conceal the practice of channeling funds to specific media outlets in a biased manner. As in previous rounds of the monitoring, state advertising persists in being the most problematic issue for most countries, and it is the highest scoring component of this indicator. The problem is a lack of adequate rules, lack of oversight in the allocation of state advertising, and the lack of transparency around it. We have to highlight that state advertising is sometimes confused with political advertising, but those are two different issues. Political advertising is a message that is political in its content. Most of the time, at least in the EU, it's regulated, at least for traditional media, and it's mostly allowed only within the framework of election campaigns. Political advertising is usually something that explicitly promotes and calls to vote for or not to vote for a candidate. State advertising, on the other hand, is any advertising, regardless of its content, that is paid for by governments, national, regional, or local, and/or state-owned institutions and companies. It can be purely commercial advertising of a business or a service that is owned by the government or partly owned by it. But if the state has a major share in a company, it should be transparent, especially as state advertising is very often used as a form of covered subsidy by the state. Elections are the lowest scoring indicator in this area, but it still has to be, So yeah, elections and political advertising online is one of the lowest scoring indicators in this area, but it still has to be highlighted that while in the traditional media, political advertising is very well regulated almost in every country that we're looking at, there are still problems on online advertising, online political advertising, especially when it comes to online platforms. And then finally, we had some recommendations and highlights. So one of them is that we recommend that reporting on state advertising by all the relevant bodies should be regular and accessible. Similarly, the media should also regularly report in a transparent and accessible way on those revenues that are generated from state support and state advertising. Because currently in 26 countries, there are no rules to ensure fair and transparent distribution of state advertising to media outlets. In more than half of the countries, the existing laws do not really work well in ensuring that appointment procedures for management and board functions in the public service media are independent. Or independent from the government or other forms of influence. And in many countries, the PSM are struggling in justifying their position and maintaining their social role in the changed information environment. The trust in public service media is decreasing. While the competencies here are with the member states, we believe that more could be done on the EU level in a multi-stakeholder collaboration. We also think that the lack of adequate regulation, research, and transparency is problematic as permanent political advertising is increasingly performed online with new techniques and actors. And another topic that we would like to give more consideration to is editorial autonomy. As the highest scoring indicator in the area of political independence, not just in this round, but also in the previous MPMs. And it is not an issue just in relation to political interference, but also in relation to commercial and owner influences. For the future MPMs, we are planning to reconsider the concept of editorial autonomy and how it can be protected in an increasingly challenging environment where political pressures are worsening also because of the economic instability of the media models. And now we will hear from Václav Štepka, or Stetka, sorry, who will talk about the Czech situation.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. So in my very short intervention, I will follow up on this summary with some observations and thoughts about editorial autonomy based on the data and experience from the Czech Republic. So the Czech Republic is an example of a country with a high level of risk for editorial autonomy, and that level has been high ever since the beginning of the monitoring. This year it's 75%, last year it was 71%, the year before 79%, so pretty much stable level. And this elevated risk stems mainly from the absence of or lack of effectiveness of either regulatory or self-regulatory safeguards ensuring editorial autonomy against political influence. And that includes appointment and dismissal of editors-in-chief. But these risks are significantly exacerbated by the fact that several media owners are themselves actively involved in politics, albeit to varying degree. And while you might have not heard the names of some of those owners, I'm sure you have heard the name of Andrej Babiš, who has been prime minister until October last year, and who still remains a very active and prime candidate, as a matter of fact, for president in the upcoming elections next year. So just to briefly recap, Andrej Babiš is a billionaire, one of the richest persons in the country, who has founded a populist movement, Yes 2011, more than 10 years ago, and who has purchased one of the biggest media houses in the country, Mafra, just a few months before the crucial 2013 parliamentary elections, which his movement claimed a second spot in. And 4 years later, he won the next parliamentary elections by a landslide and became prime minister. So this confluence of political, business, and media interests that Mr. Babiš has embodied creates a very unique situation that has not been observed in the EU since the days of none other than Silvio Berlusconi. So in the wake of Andrej Babiš's electoral success and the widespread concerns about the comparative advantage that he has gained over his political competitors, thanks to his media empire, the Czech parliament adopted the Conflict of Interest Act in 2017 that forced Babiš to place his company into a trust fund. Nevertheless, he still remained firmly in control of the company as the ultimate or beneficial owner, something that has been acknowledged even by the European Commission when examining Mr. Babiš's business interests. So right now, the MPs in Czech Republic are trying to pass an amendment to the Conflict of Interest Act that would make it impossible for an active politician or senator, MP, to be a beneficial owner, the ultimate owner, in a nationwide newspaper or radio or television station. So essentially strengthening the existing act. However, so far they have not been successful in the adoption. So the Czech case is arguably an extreme one, looking at the other countries around the EU, but at the same time, it can serve as a memento, as a warning about the fragility of a media system, which is lacking appropriate efficient safeguards that would prevent a politician from either building a media empire or a media mogul from entering and conquering politics with arguably detrimental effects for editorial autonomy and the democracy in general. Nevertheless, I would like to stress that this is a scenario which can hardly be prevented by self-regulatory instruments. Codes of ethics, as much as needed, are unlikely to prevent or save the newsrooms from political capture, as we have seen in the Czech Republic. There have to be stronger safeguards embedded within the legislative framework that will protect news media from undue political interference, and particularly by means of political ownership control. So the legislative initiatives by the Czech MPs that I have just mentioned can serve as an inspiration, but obviously we have now an opportunity to establish regulatory measures on the EU level with the preparation of the Media Freedom Act. So I believe there is an argument to push for the inclusion of those instruments that will make political ownership of news media, if not impossible, then at least significantly harder. Thank you.
Here. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. So now the social inclusiveness is the last area of the MPM. The social inclusiveness focuses in the access to media by various social and cultural groups, such as minority, including people with disabilities, local and regional communities, women. It also includes media literacy. We consider media literacy as a precondition for the use of media effectively. And the area also includes a protection against illegal and harmful speech in order to ensure a safe media space for everybody. Oh, sorry. So the overall risk for the social media area is 54%. It's 2 percentage points less than last year. So we can see an improvement in the social inclusiveness area. Most of the countries are scoring in the medium risk band. We have, as you can see on the map, we have only 5 countries that are associated with the low risk. We have France and Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, and Sweden, and 5 countries that are associated with a high risk. Montenegro, Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey, and Cyprus. If we have a look at the indicator, we can observe that 3 indicators have, there's an issue in the slide, there's a piece missing. Back. So no, it's another click. So I don't know why there's a piece missing, but I know the information says nothing is a problem. So the average risk has decreased for 3 indicators. The 3 indicators in the middle in the slide, the access to media for local, regional communities and for community media, the access to media for women, and the indicator on media literacy. The indicator on protection against illegal and harmful speech has remained mostly stable in comparison to the previous edition of the MPM. And the first indicator on the left of the slide, the access to media for minority, has increased. If we have a closer look at why this has changed, I don't know why this piece is missing on my slide. So the first indicator on the top is access to media for minority. So all the indicators are in the medium risk. But the access to minority, as I said in the previous slide, has increased. This is mostly due to the sub-indicators on access to media for people with disability, which went from 33 to 39% for EU member states and for 37 to 42 for all the countries studied. This is mostly due to the fact that there's policy in order to include, to favor the access to media for people with disabilities, but usually this is not monitored. So what PSM and what private company are doing for providing access to people with disabilities is not monitored enough, and we don't have enough data to measure that. So there's policy, but we don't know what's going on. On the other hand, we could see a slight improvement in terms of access to media for ethnic and linguistic minorities, which is mostly due to COVID-19. There's been probably there's an effect that with COVID-19, the government probably felt the need to inform minorities that were considered as probably more exposed. And so we could see in the MPM a true improvement for this sub-indicator. The medium risk at the bottom is linked to the access to local and regional media. We could observe also the positive impact of COVID-19, mostly due to the fact that some countries have voted some specific subvention to increase and strengthen the media viability of local and regional media during the pandemic. On the other side, for the community media, the main problem is that in many countries, including EU members and candidates, there's no legal recognition of community media. So regarding the access to media for women, we can see this media literacy. So sorry. I'm a bit puzzled by the information missing on my slide. So the indicator at the top, medium risk, is for media literacy. We can see that the risk is decreasing because there's an effort to develop some media literacy policies in most countries. We can mention, for example, the example of Albania. Albania has drafted a pilot curriculum for school to develop media literacy, and this is also the case in other candidates. But we notice that the risk is stable regarding media literacy activities. Media literacy activities are very important to reach some population that might not be reached by an official curriculum, for example, older population and rural population that might need some media literacy activities, especially in the context of COVID, in order to fight disinformation and misinformation. Regarding the access to media for women, we could see very important improvement, even if it's the highest risk indicator in the area. We could see that there's a significant improvement in terms of representation or in terms of gender equality in PSM, as well as in terms of representation of women. I want to insist in the sub-indicators on the representation of women. This is one of the only indicators that is scoring high risk in the social inclusiveness area. And you can see on the slide that the overall risk for this sub-indicator is 68%. And on the map, you can also notice that there's only 2 countries that are scoring low risk in the area. In the sub-indicators, this is Estonia and Lithuania. If we had to look especially in Estonia, this is probably linked to the fact that there's a lot of women in the production of news in those countries. One of the main problems you can see with the orange graph in the right bottom corner, there's a massive issue regarding the measurement of the representation of women. We are lacking data. We don't have data for 9% of the countries, which is in the field of the representation of women. This is an issue that we've known for a long time. So we consider the absence of data systematically as high risk. It means that it's something that is not taken into account. And finally, the last indicator of the social inclusiveness area is the protection against illegal and harmful speech, which is for the second most problematic indicator. But this is a very, we can see that the result is stable for this indicator, but we can see something that is very interesting. If we have a closer look at the sub-indicator, we can see that the risk associated with the sub-indicators protection against disinformation has decreased from 61% for EU member states to 58, and from 65 to 59 for all countries. While on the contrary, the risk associated for the sub-indicator on protection against hate speech has increased from 58 to 60 and from 58 to 63 for all the countries studied. So the evolution of the sub-indicators of protection against disinformation may be justified by the fact that we have modified the questionnaire in order to get more granular information regarding disinformation. In the case of protection against hate speech, the issue is more or less the same as the representation of women. We don't have systematic data on the protection against hate speech. This is 26% of the countries studied have scored no data, and we couldn't get any systematic measurement of hate speech. So the main issue, and this is why I changed a bit the format of the key finding, is the same for all the indicators of the social inclusiveness area. The issue is monitoring. There's a lack of systematic monitoring on issues such as the access to media for people with disabilities, the access to media for women, the representation of women. Is it a stereotypical representation? Is it a balanced representation? Same for hate speech and also for disinformation. Disinformation is a bit more complex to measure. This is something that is actually a big question in research. How do we monitor disinformation? But the issue for social inclusiveness is the same. It's monitoring and getting data. So in order to talk now a bit more specifically about a case, I will welcome Marianne from Finland, and she will talk about the self-regulatory framework to fight disinformation in Finland. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Marie. Good day, everyone. In Finland, protection against disinformation scores 25, relatively low, even though regulation in Finland is also in this regard very limited. Overall, the media industry is not heavily regulated. Journalism countering disinformation is based on the self-regulatory guidelines for journalists and high professional standards. Basically, all Finnish mainstream media have committed to these self-regulatory guidelines. So far, this approach has been sufficient. The foundation for this lies in strong media literacy activities with several governmental and non-governmental actors involved. The National Audiovisual Institute is a state agency. One of their core tasks is to promote media literacy. In 2019, they published, together with the Ministry of Education and Culture, new national level media literacy education guidelines. They now acknowledge the importance of media education in all age groups, including the elderly. Libraries consider promoting media literacy as one of their core tasks. Also, government's defense report published in September shows that information defense has become a part of the Finnish defense forces' normal activity. Also, some private actors are involved. News Media Finland is one example of these non-governmental actors. During so-called News Week, they engage with schools and kindergartens to promote media literacy, and they provide newspapers and have media literacy education materials on their website. And these long-running initiatives also cover disinformation awareness. So media literacy education, including training to spot disinformation, is widespread throughout Finnish society. However, as we stated in our report, more private initiatives are needed, since most of these initiatives are one way or another funded by the government. But anyway, there are several actors involved, and importance of media literacy is well recognized. No large-scale disinformation campaigns have been detected in Finland. No conspiracy theories have entered mainstream. Our public service media has devoted a lot of coverage to foreign interference and disinformation on social media. On the other hand, nowadays, disinformation often targets small groups. So detecting such attacks from outside is very difficult. There is concern on whether Finns are fully aware of the overall situation, but overall the situation is good. And lately we haven't seen anything out of the ordinary. However, the people that we interviewed for this year's report said that the hardest test is likely still to come. So the situation can change very fast, and we should keep that in mind and stay alert. Thank you.